Former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn indicted on 2 new charges of financial misconduct in Japan, with a maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. President Trump edges closer to declaring a national emergency in the United States to fund his border wall with Mexico, as the political impasse leaves the federal government shut down and 800,000 workers without pay. And the United States begins moving its 2,000 troops out of Syria less than a month after Donald Trump's shock announcement that they would withdraw from the fight against the Islamic State group. You're watching France 24. Thanks for joining us this hour. Our top story. The former chairman of Nissan, Carlos Ghosn, has been charged with 2 new financial misconduct offences in Japan. Ghosn has been in custody since November 19th, accused of underreporting his income at the carmaker over a period of 5 years. The new charges relate to understating his pay over a different 3-year period, as well as a breach of trust for temporarily transferring personal investment losses to Nissan in 2008. The company has now also lodged a legal complaint against Ghosn for what Nissan says is a misuse of its funds. Ghosn, who's credited with saving the carmaker from bankruptcy and building its alliance with France's Renault, has denied all wrongdoing. Earlier we spoke to our correspondent in Tokyo, Justin McCurry.
As expected, public prosecutors in Tokyo have levelled 2 further charges at Carlos Ghosn. You'll remember that he was charged several weeks ago concerning allegations that he underreported his salary to the tune of about 5 billion yen. That was for 5 years up to 2016. One of today's 2 charges relates to the same alleged crime, that he continued to underreport his salary for 3 years through to March last year. And then there's a third, a slightly different charge, and arguably more serious charge, that he misused Nissan funds and caused his former employer, of course, the Japanese car maker, large sums of losses. And this was by attempting to transfer personal investment losses that he made to the company at the height of the global financial crisis in 2008. So not unexpected, but what it means is, as you said in your introduction, today was the end of his latest period of detention, that he can be held in Tokyo Detention Center on these charges. So prosecutors had until the end of today to decide whether to release him on bail. Clearly that's not going to happen. To rearrest him on other charges, that doesn't appear to be happening either. But as expected, he has been indicted on these 2 other charges. So he now faces 3 charges altogether.
The head of Japan's Olympic Committee has denied all allegations of corruption after reports that he was placed under formal investigation by authorities in France. In a statement, Tsunkazo Takeda says that he hasn't been charged and that no improper action, such as bribery, took place in connection to Tokyo's successful bid for the 2020 Games. Judicial sources here in France said he was under formal investigation as part of an inquiry by the French Financial Prosecutor's Office. In the French legal system, being placed under formal investigation is a step that precedes being charged, but often leads to no further prosecution. The International Olympic Committee's Ethics Commission says it's opened a file on the case. President Trump says he's close to declaring a national emergency to secure funding for his border wall with Mexico. This as an impasse over funding for the $5.7 billion project continues, which has led to a shutdown of the federal government for the past 3 weeks. On a visit to the Texas-Mexico border on Thursday, Trump said that he would use emergency powers to fund the wall if the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives doesn't agree to it. He again insisted during the visit that a wall was necessary.
We're not talking about only Mexico. All over the world they come in, because it's a weak spot. They make it strong, but the laws have to be strong, and we need security. We need the kind of backup that you want. And they've asked, by the way, we have lists of things. What they need more than anything is the barrier, the wall, call it whatever you want. Whether it's steel or concrete, you don't care. We need a barrier.
President Trump was speaking in the city of McAllen, close to the Mexican border. During his visit, he met border guards and relatives of people murdered by alleged illegal immigrants. Peter O'Brien has more.
A city divided over a visit from the president. Supporters and opponents of Donald Trump squared off on opposite sides of the street as he toured McAllen, Texas, on the Mexican border.
This place right here, God bless America, and I hope he builds that wall. I hope he gets the money. We need it. We need a wall right here. This ain't a game. This is America.
If the president were really interested in the views and the well-being of the border, he would meet with community members. He would meet with affected landowners by the border wall, but he's not doing that. Instead, he's just coming down for a photo op. It's a political stunt, part of his presidential campaign for 2020.
At a meeting with Border Patrol agents and family members of those killed by alleged illegal immigrants, Donald Trump reaffirmed the need for a wall on security and humanitarian grounds and made fun of his critics.
They say a wall is medieval. Well, so is a wheel. A wheel is older than a wall.
As well as viewing a display of confiscated weapons and narcotics, the president visited a park where undocumented immigrants have been intercepted. He painted a picture of a stream of migrants entering the country, despite statistics showing illegal crossings along the southern border are at a 20-year low.
The US-led military coalition has begun the process of withdrawing troops from Syria. An American spokesman for the coalition didn't give details on timelines or how many troops have been moved, but the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says that activists have seen a convoy of armoured vehicles moving from Syria into Iraq. President Trump announced last month that the around 2,000 US troops stationed in Syria would leave the country. For more on this, I'm joined in studio by our International Affairs editor, Douglas Herbert. Doug, we have had some conflicting signals about the timetable for this move. Does this step now mean that everyone's on the same page?
No, it doesn't mean everyone's on the same page. It means that right now the Pentagon at least is trying to go through the motions of withdrawal. We're seeing a familiar pattern here, and that is a pattern in which Trump, who's known for being impulsive, known often for communicating his policies via Twitter, without really trying to hash them out or deliberate with his national security team on issues such as this. So the policies become sort of de facto there. They're out there for the whole public. Everyone starts reporting on them. And then there's this this pattern of playing catch-up within his own administration as officials sort of scramble to interpret what this means and also for their own agencies, because they're all sort of working in their own fiefs. When we're talking about the State Department, the Pentagon, the White House itself, all of them have their own interests, even though they're technically all the, quote, Trump administration. So they're all trying to sort of take that directive, take something away from it that could sort of advance their own causes, their own pet projects. In this case, the Pentagon is taking away from this, trying to get itself, sort of firmly behind the directive. Remember, Trump issued the directive on the pullout in December. And when you spoke about contradictions, the reason why there's been so much talk about timetables is because his own national security advisor, John Bolton, said earlier this week that the U.S. could delay even months or years unless they had guarantees that Turkey would not mistreat the Kurds, who have been the U.S. allies in that area. So right now, catch up, trying to get a coherent policy, but it's all really winging it.
You mentioned Turkey there. This pullout of American troops could have big implications for what they do next in Syria.
Absolutely. Turkey has been livid, was absolutely livid at John Bolton's remarks earlier this week when he was on a tour of the Middle East, in which what I just said, he said that the U.S., before withdrawing its forces, could delay that withdrawal pending guarantees that Turkey, who considers the Kurdish allies of the U.S. against the Islamic State group a terrorist group, unless they get guarantees about that treatment and also separate guarantees about the fight against the Islamic State, that they would not leave. And Turkey basically said, in so many words, its foreign minister, that if the U.S. delays this pullout, Turkey will launch a planned military invasion of northern Syria, which it said it was poised to do, but it's been sort of delaying so as to coordinate with the U.S. Turkey is not going to be held back by the U.S. right now. Turkey is determined to go in there, and it's made it very clear. Those fears about the treatment of the Kurds are very real and present fears. There's going to have to be some sort of diplomatic coordination there.
And meanwhile, even as it's pulling out its ground troops in Syria, the United States stepping up airstrikes targeting Islamic State group fighters.
Absolutely, because remember, Donald Trump issued this directive because, in his words, the Islamic State group was nearly defeated, but there do remain remnants of the group. They're still very much there in patches on the ground, and that remains a very real fight. And just because the U.S. is pulling ground forces out of Syria, and remember, you said begun the process of a deliberate withdrawal, that doesn't mean, as we stand here speaking, speaking right now, boots are actually leaving Syria. The personnel and equipment are being deployed to eventually, once a timetable is established, to move those troops out. But there's going to be a lot standing in the way of that. And in the meantime, you're absolutely right. The U.S. is going to use this window while it's working out to the specifics of the withdrawal to ramp up its airstrikes, to try to lessen, as it would say, the footprint of the Islamic State group, and also perhaps using troops and equipment based in neighboring countries, not just Syria.
Douglas Herbert, international affairs commentator, thank you very much for speaking to us. Let's move on with a look at some more of the day's world news headlines for you. A court in Myanmar has rejected an appeal by 2 journalists from the Reuters news agency, jailed for violating the State Secrets Act. The 2 men were arrested in December 2017 while investigating atrocities committed against the Rohingya in Myanmar. They've been sentenced to 7 years in jail. Reuters says the charge was trumped up to halt their reporting. Heavy snowfall in Austria has closed many of the country's ski stations, with mountainous areas on high alert for avalanches. The National Weather Service says the up to 3 metres of snowfall was an event seen only once every 30 to 100 years. 7 skiers and hikers have died since Saturday in the extreme conditions. And thousands of Argentinians have marched through the streets of Buenos Aires protesting against austerity measures imposed by the government of President Mauricio Macri. It's the first in a series of planned demonstrations as Macri cuts subsidies for utilities like electricity and gas. Buenos Aires agreed to slash spending as part of its $57 billion bailout from the IMF. Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro has been sworn in for a second term as president, despite international criticism of his re-election. Maduro began his second 6-year term by defending his legitimacy amid an economic collapse that's left many Venezuelans unable to afford basic goods. 17 Latin American countries were among those denouncing his return to power, with protests outside Venezuela's embassies, including in the Peruvian capital Lima. Opposition leaders inside the country say that he's usurped the presidency. Claire Muffson reports.
Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro sworn in for his second term on Thursday, as critics at home and abroad condemned his new mandate. His swearing-in held at the Supreme Court as the opposition-controlled but powerless National Assembly refuses to recognize his victory.
Nicolas, this is won by votes. You have to win by votes. You can't steal them. That's why you're illegitimate, even if you try to disguise yourself.
Presidents of regional allies Bolivia, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Cuba were on hand for the ceremony, but they were the exception. The Organization of American States on Thursday approved a resolution declaring Maduro's second term illegitimate. Peru and Paraguay both announced they were breaking off diplomatic relations, and the EU shunned Maduro as well, saying his election would deepen Venezuela's economic and social woes. In his inaugural address, Maduro denounced the colonialism and racism of the old European oligarchy and blamed the U.S. for his diplomatic isolation.
Venezuela is at the heart of a world war from North American imperialism and its satellites. They have tried to convert a formal, legal, constitutional, and peaceful swearing-in ceremony into a world war against our country.
Maduro's victory in last May's election was widely boycotted at home. His government has jailed or driven into exile the country's most popular opposition leaders. Millions have fled the country in recent years as an imploding economy has sparked a growing humanitarian crisis.
Chinese state television has broadcast pictures taken by its space rover and lander from the far side of the moon. It shows the crafts after the first ever soft landing on the far lunar surface. China's space agency saying the pictures mark a total success for the mission. This panorama is stitched together from 80 photos taken by the lander, showing a rocky surface with a jagged edge of craters in the background. I suppose that means that we've seen the whole of the moon now. Well, that's the latest world news from France 24. I'm Stephen Carroll in Paris. Do stay with us. I'll have more headlines in 15 minutes.
France 24. Every art form. An exceptional sparkling wine, a symbol of celebration the world over. This week, France in Focus invites you to discover champagne. Don't miss it on France 24 and France24.com.